I request Mr. Piyush Khaitan to give him a flower bouquet on OSWAL's behalf, sir. Thank you, Ketanji. First of all, I welcome you all. It's our first lecture, and in very short notice, Mr. Robert Bracey accepted our invitation. I thank you, Mr. Robert Bracey. Thank you very much, sir. And yeah. Mr. Mahesh Kalra will give the introduction of Mr. Bracey, and after that we have the lecture on Kushan. Right? Thank you. Mahesh ji.
Well, I think Robert really doesn't require any introduction to people who have been following his work with the ONS. And for some of us, we had a very early introduction to him during our master's course. He has been to the university to Dr. Dilip Rajgur's efforts twice. So the first introduction to Robert was at the university, and then I've seen his work as a curator at the British Museum twice. And also his editing, for some who don't know, he also edits, rather he's the assistant editor for the Oriental Numismatic Society's journal. His work is very, very meticulous. And I'm sure this will come through his lecture today, where he speaks about a lot of numbers and the production of the coins, the Kushan coins. This is something that we don't do in India, unfortunately, and we want Robert to guide some of the young scholars into doing this, because this is an effort that most of the Indian scholars have not attempted so far, especially in the Mughal series or later series. So Robert has been leading the way on, kind of predicting numbers. This has been a very old European method of studying numismatics. It begins in Roman coins, and in Indian coins, it's Mr. Robert Bracey and Mr. Joe Cribb who have been attempting it, I would say. So the same thing, the efforts can be applied to any series, I would say, and it involves some kind of scientificity, which has to be again very meticulous. So I give you Robert Bracey today for his talk on the scientific methods which are also involved in studying coinage of India. Thank you.
So let me check first of all, can everybody hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
Yeah.
That will be fine.
Okay. So we'll manage without the microphone, because it creates a bit of an echo, I find, as I walk around. So if anybody, no, it's okay. Well, if everybody can hear me clearly, can they hear me? Everybody's good, or no?
Let's come forward.
It's good. Okay. If everybody's good, then we'll proceed without the microphone. A little bit of explanation on the handout, right? If you have picked up a copy of the handout, the first page gives a brief outline about what I'm going to talk about, and for anybody unfamiliar, a list of the Kushan emperors. So this is just general historical information and their dates, so that you can follow it. For the talk, that's all you need to read. The second 2 pages contains all the things I am not going to say in the talk. These are lots of tables of numbers and formula. If you have a background in mathematics or economic modelling, you might enjoy the second 2 pages. It will give you a chance to see what's going on behind what I talk about. If you are not familiar with those fields, I strongly recommend you do not look at the second 2 pages while I'm speaking. So we're going to start off by just introducing the Kushan dynasty. The Kushan emperors are the descendants of tribal people who invaded Afghanistan in the 2nd century BC. In the early 1st century AD, one of the tribal rulers, Kujula Kadphises, sometime before 60 AD, united together the various disparate tribes and founded the Kushan Empire. And his armies passed over the Hindu Kush and they conquered Kashmir and Punjab and Sindh and his son would go on to conquer Gandhara and the Swat region and advance as far as Mathura. His son Bhima-Takto, the second Kushan emperor. Under Kajula's grandson, Bhima-Kadphises, the Kushans began to issue gold coins. So initially, when they arrived in the northwest of India, I'm just going to say northwest India, you hopefully know what I mean, Pakistan, the northwestern tip of Uttar Pradesh, up to the border with Afghanistan. When they first arrived, they simply imitated whatever coinage was in circulation locally. So they made silver coins in Sindh that were small, they made large silver coins in Bactria, they made copper coins at Begram, at Taxila, and they made a coin with a bull and camel design in Kashmir. But these were all simply continuations of coinages that already existed. Bhima-Kadphises completely reformed that. He centralised the minting at Begram. Hopefully everybody knows where Begram is. It is the site of the American Air Base in Afghanistan today. And so it's a relatively well-known place. It was a fortress in the Kushan period, and it was probably their chief administrative centre in southern Afghanistan. It was the site from which they issued their copper coinage. Bhima introduced a gold coinage as well. This is the first gold coinage that had been issued in the region for about 200 years. It's the first gold coinage that circulated in northern India. And this is an example of a double unit, a 16-gram coin. The emperor, Bhima, is seated on the front. There is a figure on the back. The figure is the Kushan god Vaishya. His iconography, the tridents, the bull, the ascetics, parts of it are borrowed from the iconography of Shiva. All of it will later in the 4th, 5th century be re-borrowed by cults of Shiva to depict Shiva in an anthropomorphic form. So, but at this time, this is actually the Kushan god Vaishya. He's the chief god in their pantheon. The obverse legend is in Greek, Basilius, Remo, Kadphises. The reverse legend is in Gandhari, Kharosthi script, Maharajasa at the top there, so king. It's a translation of Greek on the other side. It's the gold coins I'm going to be talking about today. And this is mostly because we just know a lot more about gold coins than we do about copper. Right? People have been interested in them for longer, they've studied them for longer, they have collected more data. The most famous king of the Kushan dynasty is Kanishka. This is the Kanishka of the Great Buddhist Council, and he ruled from 127 to 150 AD. I raise this because you may have seen different dates for this. It is now almost certain that Kanishka started his reign within a few years of 127 AD. And the era associated with his name definitely begins at 127. In about 230 AD, the Kushans, whose base, so they start in Bactria. So they begin primarily as an Afghan dynasty that ruled parts of northwest India. In about 230 AD, the new Sasanian Empire invades Bactria and conquers it under Ardashir I, the founder of the dynasty. The Kushans lose that region, and the Sasanians actually issue coins copying the designs of the Kushans. So this is a Sasanian coin, and it shows the Kushan emperor. It has the Kushan emperor's name and titles. It has the same image of Vaishya with the bull. There is in fact a legend here that says Weisho. The script on the coin is still Greek, but the language is Bactrian, an Iranian language. So it's a Greek script being used to write an Iranian language. And that is a change that was introduced under Kanishka I. The dynasty continues to rule in Swat, Gandhara, Punjab, northern Uttar Pradesh, the region around Mathura especially, through to the end of the 3rd century. Vasudeva II is an informative king. There is still a Greek legend, Greek script, Bactrian language around the outside of the coin. But it's now very corrupt, and you can only read it on some examples. The king now begins to put his name here in Brahmi script, Vasu, on the coin. Here we have the other important god in the Kushan pantheon, the goddess Ardaksha. She's the goddess of prosperity. So where Weisho borrows his imagery from Shiva, from an Indian tradition, Ardaksha borrows her imagery from the Greek goddess Tyche. Technically, Tyche is a class of goddess rather than an individual goddess. It is a goddess who is the sign of prosperity of a city. So there are many Tyches for different cities. And it's the image of those Tyches that is borrowed to depict the goddess Ardaksha. And this is one that people won't have seen. It's a small copper coin. This one is from the British Museum. There is a king standing on the front. There is an image of the goddess Ardaksha on the back. There is a large Brahmi letter on the side there. This is a coin of the Kushan king Shaka. Shaka is the penultimate king of the dynasty. He is named in the Allahabad pillar inscription. Okay? You won't find this in the publications of that inscription because you will find a line in the inscription that says Devaputra, Shahi, Shaka, Morunda, and a gloss in the footnote that tells you that these are several different kings in the northwest. Okay? It's one king. Those are the titles of the Kushan emperor, and Shaka, which is usually read as a tribe, the Sakas, the Scythians, is in fact the name of this emperor. Okay? So he is a contemporary of Samudragupta. He is succeeded by a king called Kibunada, and Kibunada is defeated and the Kushan Empire brought to an end by the Kidarites. The Kidarites are the first wave of Hunnic invaders that pass into the northwest in the 4th century. They will be replaced by the Alcons. The Alcons are ultimately the people that Kumaragupta battles with. So this is where the Kushan dynasty fits in the history of the northwest of India. So what do we presently know? We know a great deal about the designs on coins. We understand the language, we understand the iconographies, we can see the influences, the Iranian influences, the Roman influences. Kushan coinage is very loosely inspired by Roman gold coinage, which circulates, of course, in India at this period. And we can see the Indian elements, the elements that are being brought in from the south. And there are elements as well that come locally from Swat and from Gandhara. As I said, these are the two main gods, Weisho and Ardaksha. You will hear a lot about the Kushan pantheon, this vast range of gods. Right? The Kushan pantheon is only really represented on the coins under Kanishka and Huvishka. And the full range of it is only actually represented of one mint in one short period in the reign of Huvishka. People exaggerate too much how diverse the pantheon is. For most of the dynasty, these are the only two gods who appear on the coins. And they are part of a royal cult that the king appeals to for authority. Right? And the king sets up Bagalagos temples around the Kushan Empire, which show his power, but also display the gods and their support for the empire. We actually understand this very well nowadays about the Kushans. This is well understood. We understand how the Kushan dynasty relates numismatically to other dynasties. So this is a coin of Vasudeva II, who I explained is ruling in the late 3rd century. These are coins of Guptas. And the reverse, the goddess on the back of the Gupta coins, is copied from here. So the Gupta kings take the general design on the obverse, but they change it to reflect their own apparel, their own motifs of power. But on the reverse, for familiarity, because coins are conservative, they just take the whole design, right? So much so that they copy the control mark from the face of coinage that they're imitating. And they copy the details of the drapery on our dock shows things. So we understand this, we understand numismatically how the coinage of Kushans links to the coinage of other dynasties. What we don't understand is how the coins circulate, what they're doing. Right? We understand the designs, but not why are they making coins? What's happening to those coins when they go into circulation? And one of the pieces of research that I have been working on is to try and understand how Kushan coins circulate. To do that, I have tried to build a very simple mathematical model, the kind of model economists use to understand economies, though much simpler because we have a lot less data. So, and the model works something like this. There are coins that are being used in circulation. They are coming from the mint. Some of those coins leave circulation by being returned to the mint, to be turned into more coins, by being melted down and sent into the general supply of gold that everybody has, jewellery, statues, small silver foil you can deposit in a Buddhist reliquary. That seems to be a very popular practice. Or the coins are hoarded and the hoards are not recovered. And of course, this is where our coins come from. Our coins come from this loss. So every coin that we have today is a coin that was permanently lost from circulation at some point in the Kushan period. We know that they're leaving via hoarding. We presume that gold must be coming into the gold stocks. And in my model, I've thought of that as mining. But of course, it doesn't have to be mining. It could be imported from other parts of the world. One of the suggestions that's been made on a number of occasions, and I'm going to tell you that it's wrong later on, is that the gold Kushans used came from Rome. That Roman coins were shipped in. As you know, Roman gold coins are found in India in this period. They're much more extensive in southern and central India than in the northwest. And people early on assumed, well, the coins that come into the northwest, presumably they're being melted to turn into Kushan coins. We know this is not true today, right? But I will also explain a little bit more that the model has told us about why the original assumptions that underpinned that theory are not needed. So, what are we trying to find out? What are we trying to find out by building this model? We're trying to, or rather, what do we need to know in order to build the model? We need to know how many coins are made. That first bit, the minting. We need to know how many coins is the mint making. How many coins are being lost or sent back to the mint to be recoined or dropped into hoards. Okay? And how much gold is being used in those coins. If I know these three things, I can build the model. So I began conceptually thinking about how do coins circulate? And then I sat down and thought, well, what do I need as data to be able to understand that circulation? And I came to these 3 questions. And this is one of the main reasons we build models. We don't actually expect the model to give us answers. We expect the model to pose us questions that illustrate to us where we don't understand. 20 years ago, we did not know the answers to any of these questions. So how many coins were made? There are lots of ways we could go about trying to work this out. We could look at the number of coins that are found in public collections today. We could count them. And we could add up those numbers, and we could assume that the number that are in public collections reflects the number that were originally made. And that will hopefully sound familiar to those people who've taken numismatic courses, because it is the method that R.S. Sharma took, and he used it. He believed it demonstrated a feudal development in the first millennium, that the number of coins went down subsequently after the Kushana period. I am going to show you an alternative method. Coins are made like this. This is obviously not a picture of a Kushana mint. I don't have any pictures of Kushana mints, but we know that the coins were made in essentially the same way. The image of the king was on a die that was fitted into an anvil. The image of the god was on a die that was held. I suspect that that is an artistic interpretation. I think the person holding the other die would have been using a pair of tongs. I certainly wouldn't want to be holding a die while somebody spun that hammer down on top of it. But that's how the coins are made. And those 2 dies are engraved by hand, individually. And so every die that's made looks slightly different. And therefore, we can count the number of dies that were used to make the coins. And that is likely to be a very reliable indicator of how many coins were made. Dies simply wear out, so you need more if you've got more coins. So, this is that clear? Can everybody see that chart? Because I know this grey doesn't always come out. Good, okay, I'm getting some nods from the back there. So this is what Sharma thought was going on. He thought, based on counting coins, or I happen to know from my predecessor, asking a curator how many coins he had in his cabinet, right? He believed that there were a lot of punch mark coins, and there were a lot of Kushana coins. And then there were some Western satrap and Gupta coins, and some other coins, but actually there weren't very many until it got to the Sultanate period. And so this was one of the arguments he deployed to indicate that something fundamentally altered here, and he believed it was a reduction in the money supply, reduction of the coinage. So, these are the coins of Kuvishka. This is the Kushan emperor who has all the images, mid-2nd century, has all the images of the gods on the back of his coins. In the British Museum, there are 190 of these coins. These are coins of the Roman Emperor Trajan. He is a contemporary of Kanishka and Kuvishka. In the British Museum, there are 100 of these coins. And these are the coins of the penultimate Kushan emperor, Shaka. This is the contemporary of Samudra. In the British Museum, there are 25 of these. So Sharma is suggesting Kuvishka made twice as many coins as the Roman Emperor Trajan, and he made 8 times as many as his successor, Shaka. We have die studies. Somebody has counted the dies for all of these coins, and we know how long these people ruled. So we know how many dies they used each year to make their coinage. Kuvishka used 4 obverse dies every year. The Roman Emperor Trajan, in his 5th and 6th consulates, his coins are divided up based on when he held certain offices, and this is what those are. 32 dies and 38 dies every year. Shaka, 32 dies every year. Sharka made 9 times as many coins as Hubishka, but he only has 1/8 the number of coins in the collection. We have very preliminary studies from Guptas. Samudra made 52 dies a year. His mint was producing an enormous number of coins. That is not, that 78.9 is not the number of dies per year for Chandra. That's the number of dies per year for that type. Right? Samudra and Chandragupta made more gold coins in their reign than the Kushan Empire made in its entire history. So production of gold coinage did not go down after the Kushans, it went up enormously under the Guptas. Right? It was a staggering level of production. And so we can use that data. We can answer our first question. How many coins are being made? And in fact, on those second and third pages are data tables that explain to you exactly how many dies were counted and exactly how we extrapolate from that, how many dies were originally made, and so on. Then we come to the more difficult question. How many coins were lost? Now this is quite difficult, and I've spent a bit of time puzzling over this, and I've realised that fortunately, right, the same thing that caused our distortion in the previous thing, that people are very interested in Kushan coins. That's why the Kushan coins appear in museums, because in the 19th century, everybody wanted every Hubishka coin. And if they could get some Samudra and Chandra, they would get some Samudra and Chandra, but they wanted Kushan coins. The same thing means we've got lots of records of hoards. Right? This is one of the more interesting ones. This is the Dadar monastery in Ethiopia. It's actually on top of a cliff. You can only get to it by climbing up a rope, right, which has to be lowered down to you from the monks in the monastery. You are only allowed to visit it if you are a man, right? It's weird thing in Ethiopia. Only men can go up to the monastery. They have to have special permission. It's a 6th century building. What's interesting about it is there's a set of caves underneath the monastery, and in those caves was discovered a hoard of Kushan coins. Unfortunately, it was discovered in 1941, right, when the Italians were there, and the Second World War means we don't know where it went. But we do know what was in it. There were 5 Bhima Kadphises, 5 Kanishka, 88 Hubishkas, and 6 Vasudevas, which I've managed to leave the K off. And so, it looks like this. Right? These are the distributions, the brown lines. That's how many coins were in the hoard. The grey line is how many coins were actually, it was the production rate, which we just worked out. Now, Bhima is of no use. These are Bhima's quarter coins. We know the production, when it began with Bhima, began as a prestige issue. It shows a very odd set of patterns. He makes a small number of coins, and then the production stops. And then at some later point, they make more coins, but it's all new personnel. All the procedures have changed, the artists have changed. And so it looks like at the very beginning of Bhima's reign, this wasn't part of a regular production of coinage. So it's not much use to us for calculations. What's interesting in this hoard is the Kanishka and Hubishka coins. The Kanishka coins were being made at this rate of production. They were made that way for 23 years. And while they were being made, they were also being lost. Then they stop making Kanishka coins and they start making Hubishka coins. This is a coin from late in his reign. It's a very famous coin because sometimes this has been interpreted as a bird standard. It's actually a flaw in the dial, which an inventive engraver at the Mint has retouched so that it doesn't look quite so unattractive. So while Hubishka's coins are being made, there are no more Kanishka coins being made, and they are gradually being lost. They're either being returned to the Mint to been remitted, or people are taking them in savings. So you begin at the start of Vivishka's reign with a lot of Kanishka coins and no Vivishka coins. And gradually the Kanishka coins go down and the Vivishka coins go up to pass each other until there are relatively few Kanishkas in circulation, a lot of Vivishkas. And then at the end of Vivishka's reign, they are both frozen, because neither Vivishka coins nor Kanishka coins are being made any longer. So their ratio should now stay the same, and they will both gradually be lost throughout Vasudeva's reign until eventually there are no more Vivishka and Kanishka coins in circulation. So any hoard like this that contains some Vasudeva coins, as well as these two, allows us to estimate how quickly coins are being lost based on these middle two kings. I won't explain exactly how that's done, but if you really, really want to know, it is on the second and third page. Okay? So we answered our first two questions. And in case you're interested, the loss rates come out about 6% a year. So every year, about 6% of the coins that are in circulation are being lost in some way. Some of those are going into hoards for us to find later. Some of those are probably just being melted down and turned into jewellery. And some of them will be going back to the mint to be turned into the net king's coins. So we've got those two figures. And now we need to know how much gold is in the coin. And there's lots of different ways we can do this. And two ways that have been used for Kushan coins are atomic absorption methods and specific gravity. Specific gravity is the easier of those to carry out. You measure the coin's weight, you put it in water, and you measure how much it weighs again. That allows you to estimate the coin's density. Gold is 19 times denser than water, 19.3. Whereas silver and copper are only 9 or 10 times denser than water. So a coin that's merely pure gold will have density of 19, a coin that's silver or copper will have density of about 10. In between, there's a relationship between the density and the gold content. Atomic absorption is very useful because it gives us an idea of how much silver or copper is being put in with that. Essentially what you do is you take the coin, you put it into a nuclear reactor, along with a piece of gold, a piece of copper, and a piece of silver. You lift it back out carefully. You then measure how much radiation is coming off the copper, the silver, and gold, and how much radiation is coming off the gold coin. And it allows you to estimate how much of the coin is gold, how much is copper. So it's a very accurate technique, and it measures the whole coin. And along with a technique called inductively coupled plasma mass spectroscopy, it's been used on Kushan coins. And this is why we know two important things. When the Kushans adulterated their gold, they added a mixture of 2 parts silver to 1 part copper. It's a very useful mixture to add because it's slightly orangey in colour, and therefore it leaves the coin looking gold. If you add too much silver, the coin looks white. If you add too much copper, it looks red, and people would notice. But Kushan coins continue to look gold even when they don't have a lot of gold in them. We also know, as a result, that the Kushan coins are not made by melting down Roman coins, because Kushan coins have a lot of palladium and platinum in them, whereas Roman coins have very little of either. Palladium and platinum look like and act like silver. And until the 17th century, people couldn't distinguish them effectively from silver. So the Kushans were not adding palladium and platinum into their coins, they were just sourcing it from somewhere that already had palladium and platinum in there. So we know two important bits of information there. And more importantly, we have a lot of results from specific gravity. Thousands of them. Right? There are over 1,000 Kushan coins have been tested in this way, which is an enormous, to put it in perspective, I am unaware of any other series in the ancient world that has the level of analytical data we have available for Kushan coins. Right? The entire of the Indian Museum in Calcutta, the whole of the British Museum, the sections of the Ashmolean, the BKB and Varanasi, right? All of these collections have been tested. So we have an enormous amount of data. So we know how much gold is in there. And we know, until the reign of Vasudeva, this is Vasudeva I, dressed in armour, Vaishya on the back of the coin. Until his reign, the coins are over 90% gold. So they're very pure. At the end of his reign, the mint in Bactria is lost to the Kushan Shah, the Sasanian pretenders. And they make copies of these coins. Various things set them apart. There are different control marks on. The head of Vaishya breaks through the dotted border. That's the most distinct thing about it. The mint at Taxila begins to make coins of Kanishka II, right? Who also issues coins of Vaishya, and he's standing in armour. Right? Here it says Nishko. So the K would be over here. Nishko Kushan, Kanishka Kushan. So these are coins that say Kanishka, but we know typologically they have to come after Vasudeva. I'm referring to him as Kanishka II. In some texts you will find him referred to as Kanishka III. This is to do with problems around the dating, which have mostly been resolved, but in reading an old text you have to be very careful, right, that the people are referring to the king you think they're referring to. So if anybody has read Upinder Singh's recent book by Princeton, she refers to this king as Kanishka III. Right? And so the gold content is beginning to drop. It's still quite high, it's in the 80% sort of area. These are coins, again, the Kushan Shah and Kanishka. And this is Kanishka's successor, Vasishka. And his coins are distinguished by this chew mark on the side. If the coin is in really good condition and the edges are present, you can read Vaseshka on the edge, the Bactrian for Vasishka. Most of the time you can't. By this stage, it's clear that these control marks are now serving the purpose of identifying the king. He is wearing a kaftan, he's got goddess Ardaksho on the back. Her association with wealth and prosperity is symbolised by a pile of coins at her feet. This will eventually become the lotus under the Guptas, but at this stage it's a pile of coins. Vasishka, at both the mints he runs in Taxila and probably somewhere in the Punjab, is succeeded by Vasudeva II. Vasu on the coins. And at this stage, from this point on, the coins feature only Ardaksha on the reverse. We know, and this is where the confusion has arisen in the past, there is an inscription from a place called Ara, which refers to Kanishka, the son of Vasishka, in the year 41. Traditionally, that year 41 was read as being in the reign of Vishka, and people assigned a Kanishka there, an additional Kanishka in the sequence. Today, because of a reading of an astronomical text, the Yavana Jataka, we know that these dates belong to a sequence that begins in 227 AD. It's the 2nd century in the Kushan sequence, or another era, we're not sure. But Kanishka III, the son of Vasishka, issues these coins. They are interesting in two respects. One, they do not come from the mints that were making his father's coins. Two, there are design elements, such as the way the ribbons are depicted on the trident, that typologically link them with the Kushan Shah coins. If the Ara inscription is correct, we have an inscription in the year 30 telling us that Kanishka has been born. And in year 41, we have an inscription telling us he is king. He is only 11 years old. Right? He is not quite the figure depicted on the front of his coins. So we suspect the way Kushan names tend to work. That's an uncle, right, or some relative, Vasudeva II, usurps the throne, right, and that he survives as a puppet of the Sasanians, right, at some point. Certainly, the two sets of coins are being issued side by side together. By this stage, they're now down into the sort of 78% area for gold. Both groups of coins are dropping their gold contents. But you can see there's a lot of variation in the lighting conditions. The coins all look gold. So at this stage, the Shroffs are probably noticing, right? But the king was probably thinking he's being quite clever, passing off these debased coins. There is a Kushan emperor called Mahi, who rules for a very short period. Can't be more than 4 or 5 years. There are a group of coins issued by somebody calling themselves either Magra or possibly Mashra, right? Given the difference between those two characters, it's hard to be certain. There does appear to be a crossbar in some of them, so probably Mashra. But these are not issued from Kushan mints. So again, we've clearly got a complex political situation which we can't unravel because we only have the coins. It tells us it's complex, but it doesn't tell us exactly what's happening. Right? What exactly is Mashra's relationship to the Kushan dynasty? Mahi is succeeded by Shaka, who I've already mentioned, the contemporary OSWAL. Shaka's coins drop below 60% for the first time. The production also goes up dramatically at this point. And he is succeeded by Kibanada. Kibanada initially issues coins that are about 40–45% gold. They're now becoming visibly distinctive. You can begin to tell that this is not quite pure gold. The coins tend to crack at the edges, where there's a slightly higher concentration of copper or silver. Corrosion will cause them to crack. His northern mint at Taxila is conquered by the Kidarites. And at that point, the southern mint, somewhere in the Punjab, its gold content plummets. It drops down to the point where these are copper. They're just made of copper. They may originally have been slightly coated to try and continue to pass them off as a gold coin, but they are essentially a copper coin. And this is the end of the Kushan dynasty. So, I gathered all of this data, and as I explained, to some extent, making a model is more about that data gathering process than it is about the model itself. It's about, the model tells me what I don't know, and I then go out and look to see, can I answer those questions I don't know in order to put the data in. And I can put in now data into the model. I can see the level of coin production, and I can see the amount of gold that's in the circulating coinage. And some of the interesting features, these are not AD dates, these are the first year in which I'm starting the model through to 250. So that first year is about 110 AD. The first thing is how level that is. So for that whole period, from Kanishka, Kuvishka, Vasudeva, Kanishka II, the amount of coinage in circulation is very steady. Right? And there isn't very much gold being added to circulation at all. Right? Even though they're making coins every year, they get to a certain point and then the loss of coinage is actually greater than or equal to the amount of coinage that they're producing. And that was one of the first things that was not expected. I expected this graph to rise sort of like this. And once I started to think about the model, I realised that was because of that very high loss rate the hordes gave us. A high loss rate means that you simply don't get an increase in coinage. It levels out and it stays there. And thus the gold supply is very indifferent to the amount of coinage that's being made. This little peak here occurs under Kanishka II and Vasudeva II, and this sudden jump here is Shaka, greatly increasing the production point. But you'll notice the gold in circulation doesn't increase with it, because the debasement means that the older, purer coins get sucked out of circulation, And of course, they compensate for the newer debased coins being made in much larger numbers. And in fact, towards the end of the reign of Shaka, the gold in circulation is actually falling, not increasing. So, the number of coins in circulation is actually relatively static. That was the first conclusion we drew. Even when the production rises, gold in circulation does not. Older, purer coins are pulled out of circulation. For most of the Kushan period, the amount of gold in circulation is actually falling or stable. The amount we need to put in through that figure I referred to as mining, but it could be import, remember the theory of coins being brought from the Roman Empire, is actually very minor. Part of the reason people assumed that Roman coins were being used is they assumed that the Kushans needed a lot of gold. The coinage was very large, they reasoned, and you had to get that gold from somewhere to make it. Turns out the coinage is actually relatively small. And of course, most of it, once the coinage has started, could be fed recycling the existing coinage. In fact, it's so small, this is a picture from the northern Indus. There's a small community in the Indus Valley today. I discovered this while I was looking at this. One of the things the moderation of a small community of about 200 or 300 that survives by panning for gold in the Indus River, right? Recovering a relatively small amount, a few kilograms a year. Right? It sustains the community. A few kilograms a year, if they could sell it directly for the world market price, would more than sustain the community. But unfortunately, they have to sell it at well below the market value to intermediaries. So there may have been much larger trace deposits available 2,000 years ago. Okay? That canned gold would actually be sufficient to sustain the Kushan coinage for most of the dynasty. There would need to have been an initial input of gold under Bhima-Kadphises to get the coinage started, but we know from deposits in Buddhist stupas that actually there was quite a lot of gold available to people in the 1st century. There was enough that they could leave small reliquaries, gold plates, gold beads in relic deposits quite freely. So there was plenty of gold available. What's clear is we don't need to postulate any large-scale mining. And it explains something very interesting about those results that came from the atomic absorption and the mass spectroscopy, that the palladium and platinum trace is fairly constant right the way through the Kushan dynasty. Even though the gold space in the territory of the Kushans changes, the gold looks the same. 2 centuries after the coinage started, as it did at the beginning. Well, that would make a lot of sense if they were mostly recycling it, and if their source for it was somewhere they didn't lose until the very end of the dynasty. The Kushans remain embedded on the edge of the Indus in Taxila until the time of Kipurana. So they continue to have access. Now, I don't know, we can't know if this is the actual source. Maybe there was a physical mine. Maybe we just don't know where it is. We would need, of course, to go out, measure ancient metalworking sites, and take the traces from those. So we know the kinds of questions we would need to ask to actually move on from there. But what we've gained by modelling it is we've gained that incentive to go out and ask a whole bunch of questions that we didn't previously ask about Kushan coins. We concentrated very much on design. We didn't think about what was happening in coins when they were circulating. And people made assumptions that the coinage was large, that it needed a lot of gold, which actually, it turns out, totally unfounded. The basic evidence shows us actually that much. So that's a sample of the research that I'm doing. As I said, for those people who are interested in those kinds of things, on the 2nd and 3rd page, all of those details that underpin the data tables, the formulas that I use to feed the spreadsheets are actually there. Okay? Thank you very much for listening. I'd like to say thank you very much for the invitation to speak in Aspen.
House is open for questions.
Yes.
If there are any questions?
Straight away.
It's a great lecture that you've been very informative and very detailed explanations given. I have a few questions in regards to the technique which is used to identify the chemical composition of the metal. So as in the mining which is done.
It's okay, I'll repeat the question once.
Yeah, I would just like to know the production or rather the mining which is done by the Indus Valley right now, as you mentioned, that 200 to 300 people are actually mining right now the gold. So is the chemical composition the same as the cushion coinage? Because if at all that's the same source, it would be matching with the chemical composition.
So this is a question about the chemical composition of gold from the potential source. And the answer is I don't know, because I know that people are mining gold there because anthropologists are very interested in people. But the anthropologists are not actually interested in the gold, so they tell me the people are there and they tell me the people are mining, they have a subsistence economy, and I can get a rough idea of the scale of production based on what you need to keep 200, 300 people alive. But I can't, without physically going out there, getting some gold, and then having it tested, there would be no way to know. Unfortunately, those tasks are difficult and expensive, and so not things that I'm in a position to do. So I don't know. I give this as an example because it's one of the places, it's one of the potential sources. And one of the things I do encounter, I have encountered in the past, is people saying, oh, there is no gold in the northwest. There is no gold in these regions. So the Kushans must have imported it. And this is a demonstration that there is gold in these regions. And that actually, given that you don't need very much, right, there clearly enough gold to explain what's going on. So I'm giving this as an example rather than saying that this is the source. And as I say, we would not know without detailed tests, and those tests are unfortunately very difficult to carry out. So I can't answer the question.
Another thing, with this kind of the tests which are done for the purity of the gold used in cushion coinage, so can you, does it damage or rather does it do any effect on the surfaces of the coin or rather the natural patina form?
Okay, so this is about different sorts of tests and whether or not they are invasive, whether or not they damage the material. So there are 4 different sorts of tests we're talking about. There's been very little X-ray fluorescence work done on Kushan coins, which is the least invasive of the techniques available. Specific gravity, to be accurate, requires us to clean the coins with acetone. Okay? I actually stopped a set of tests being done at one point because I decided I could not learn anything more by the results, and somebody in the future might be able to gain something by looking at the pattern, and it destroys the pattern, obviously. Nothing on the surface slice, because if there's dust or something on the surface, it alters the density. So you lose that bit of contextual information. It's usually fine with museum collections, most of which have been handled or cleaned already, and therefore aren't going to have that kind of data associated. The neutron activation and proton activation, the particular methods used here, they are not invasive. However, I understand from those who use them, there is a small risk that if your coin contains the wrong element, the reactor will not let you have it back for 100 years, right? So while not destructive, there are risks associated. The inductively coupled, the ICPMS, as it's called, is destructive. You have to fire a laser beam into the edge of the coin, and it vaporizes a small bit of the metal. I've attended a number of conferences where people have assured me, they've told me, that the hole that is left is so small you cannot see it. I suspect some of these people do not have very good eyesight. Right? And I think very much like older mass spectroscopy techniques, you can see that there's a hole. For a coin that sits in a museum reserve collection, I personally can't see any issue with having a hole inside of it. I mean, you know, who cares if there's a hole inside? For the coin you're going to put on display as part of your collection, obviously you prefer it not to have a hole at the side, right? But at the British Museum, I displayed 10 of these coins, right, out of 500. We loan 10 or 15 of them out to other institutions. So maybe those rotate around. Of the whole collection, 30 or 40 coins will ever be seen on display. Right? 450 of them are going to stay in the reserve collection. So it's quite reasonable in those circumstances to do very minimal damage like that. And people have taken that position at the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, and they've allowed these sorts of tests to be done. It's not something that I suspect you would be able to do in all contexts. But in museum reserve collections, it's usually a test that if you can show that you will get results that are important and meaningful, that will be allowed. Of course, almost always only allowed if the scientific or conservation department within the museum itself can carry it out. Right? It's not something a museum would allow an external body to do to their coins usually. So the Bibliothèque Nationale has connections with the scientific research departments in Paris, and they were able to carry out the work there, and that's why that was done. So I hope that kind of answers the techniques range from totally non-destructive to damaging, but none of them destroy the historical evidence of the coin's design. They are all taken either from the edges, or they are taken away pattern. Okay? So, are there any other questions? Can
I ask you another question? I have seen many imitative coinage of Hovishka, wherein exactly the same motifs have been used as the original or the coins which have been issued officially by Hovishka. So I can't find any detailed study to actually classify them if they were imitation or were they issued by a certain region or locally. The very thin flan coins with exactly the same motifs.
So I think we need to make clear these are copper coins.
Copper coins, yes.
So it's something I haven't referred to because I've been talking about gold, is that in the middle of the reign of Hovishka, unrelated to the gold debasement, the copper coinage is reduced in weight. So it's reduced from the standard unit being a 16-gram coin. We believe that this is a tetragram, a continuation of Greek silver denomination. And it's reduced to a 9-10-gram coin. This has a number of effects. The first one is huge numbers of the older 16-gram coin are almost immediately exported out of the Kushan Empire and into northern India. So large numbers of hoards are found in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Bengal, and even some coins down into Orissa that contain these heavyweight coins. They are not there because the Kushan Empire ruled there. They are there because the weight has been reduced, there's demand for copper coinage, and these coins are going cheap. So they're sucked out of the Kushan Empire and into those regions. Alongside that, there is a very large-scale production of imitations, locally, in various areas. These can be divided into certain broad categories. There are a number of very crude imitations, which are relatively heavy, and are almost certainly made in Gandhara and the Punjab. And there are a lot of thin flan light coins which we simply don't have any provenance information for. Michael Michener attributed to them to the Yuan, who are a tribal group in Central Asia. We just don't know, because we don't know where they're being found. There are some that are clearly being made in the Ganges Valley. They're not these thin types, they weigh about 4 or 5 grams. They're part of a series of coins, a series of imitations that you find moving eastwards and eventually become what we refer to as purely Kushan coins in Orissa, which are actually cast. So there are a whole series of imitations. They are not well documented in the numismatic literature, but there are studies of them. Probably the best study available on the copper coinage in general are a series of articles by Gul Rahim Khan of Peshawar University, in which he has re-examined the material that was found in Taksim by John Marshall. And he has used a very modern typology for all these coins. So that incorporates a lot of this data. But there is not yet a good source. And that's not easy to get hold of because it's published in a set of volumes called Gandharan Studies from Peshawar University. They're produced a very small print. So that's a little unfortunate. But I think that's the group you're referring to. And again, like your earlier question, the answer to some of that is I don't know. There's a...
I have a couple of questions. First, to talk about 6% loss of coins.
Yes.
Can you explain how you come to 6%?
The formula is in the sheet. And what I did was I applied that to about 4 or 5 hordes where we have that situation of 2 kings who we know the production for, who are not the last king in the horde, and compared their relative number of coins present to the original production. And we can, if we know the ratio of their productions and the ratio of coins present, you can write a formula that relates those two using a loss amount, and then you can solve that formula to get the loss amount. And it actually varies, right? 6%, I think it's 6%, I would have to check the handbook. 6% for the Deborah Damo, but actually slightly higher for one of the other. One of the hordes is very high, it suggests a rate of about 20%. One of the very late hordes actually suggests quite a low rate. But 6% from the limited data there looks like a reasonable figure. The advantage of the model is we can alter that percentage. As long as it's 3% or higher, it seems to have the same basic effect. It dampens any changes in the currency supply. So actually, it's relatively insensitive. As long as the loss rate isn't significant, the effect is the same. And all of the hordes, except one, seem to suggest a relatively significant amount of loss, and that confirms the general picture you get just by looking at the hordes. You don't find very many hordes of Vasudeva II that have got early coins in. Most of them have, they'll have Kanishka II and Vasishka, but as you know, there aren't a lot of Kanishka first or Vivishkas in a horde that's got Vasudeva II. So the coins have clearly been lost out of circulation relatively rapidly, so that they can mostly disappear within 50 or 100 years. And that gives us approximate loss rates for them. The formula, as I say, is in there. It's a relatively simple relationship to establish. You just need enough hordes. I would suggest that we have enough hordes to have an idea, but not enough hordes to be really confident. We could do, if we had 10 or 20 hordes that we could do this with, we could be very confident. And it might be that the loss rate actually alters over the period. That as the debasement increases, more coins are lost. I would suspect that might be the case. But we don't know. It would be very interesting to get a larger body of data. And of course, the body of data increases every few years as a new horde is published. It increases more slowly nowadays than it used to, because the hordes are often not published before they get broken up. But we have, as you know, about 25 or so gold hordes of Kushan coins, and so that's a reasonable number to be making estimates from. It doesn't put us anywhere near the sort of league for some European coinage like the broken coinage, where obviously there are whole books just full of lists of different hordes. It would be wonderful to be in that sort of situation. But yeah, so that's roughly how we're coming out with the figure of 60%.
Fine. Secondly, you said that Huvishka had some 32 dies.
Huvishka produces, his mint produces about 4 dies a year, about 160 dies, obverse dies, over the course of his reign.
So if you compare the dies used by Prema-Katapaises and Huvishka and Shaka, so you say that the Shaka had as many as 72 dies per person.
Shaka had about 32 dies a year.
32 dies.
Yeah.
So it means that the more the dies, the more the coins.
Yes.
But does it mean also that maybe the dies which were used by the later Kushan kings like Shaka, they were not that high in quality, and they were breaking down in the minting process, and they were supposed to be replaced, and that's the reason why we are having more dies. But at the same time, the imperial Kushans that we're talking about, their coins, if you compare with the later Kushans, they are much higher in quality. So maybe they were using a very good quality bronze or something like that, where the dies are not breaking. So if we just assume that the less number of dies are there, the less coins are issued, I think that is slightly difficult to understand.
This is a perfectly fair point. We use the die counts because they're our most reliable indicator, not because they are a definitely correct indicator. There is this risk that one set of dies might be making 10,000 coins a die, and another set might be making 20 or 30,000 coins a die. And we know that risk exists. Even so, it would be very hard for Shaka with 8 times the number of dies to be a smaller coinage. Even if his dies were only making 10,000 coins and Huvishka's were making 20 or 30,000 coins, Shaka would still be 3 times larger. So it wouldn't alter the general pattern, though we can certainly do. I will say that there's a couple of things to bear in mind that we do know from the die studies. One of them is that much as our picture of the number of coins is deceptive because we appreciate the variety on Huvishka, so we actively collect in museum collections, so actually our picture of the artistic quality is actually a little bit distorted. Some of the engravers under Shaka are very good. They make a stylized design, but it's a technically very adept stylized design, done by an engraver who knows his craft. Some of the engravers under Huvishka are actually very bad at their job. They are illiterate, they are often incompetent, they are technically not very adept, especially in the middle of his reign. We can pin it down to a relatively small number of people because we know under Huvishka, so under Shaka, there are a number of engravers working. Under Huvishka, at many points, because our die studies are very complete, we can see that there's a single engraver, and we can see when it's replaced by a new engraver, and its replacement might be not very good. We tend, because our picture of Huvishka coins, because our picture of Huvishka coins tends to come from that small group that is issued at the main mint, late in his reign, where all the different gods appear. The engravers who are working there are very good. Okay? And we tend to assume that because those are the ones that are pictured in catalogues and books, that the whole of Huvishka's coinage reflects the standard of that small group of engravers. Actually, that group of engravers are very good by the standard of Huvishka mint. So it's a common argument that's made that Shaka's coins represent a relatively low artistic standard and Huvishka's a relatively high one. I would suggest actually that both mints have good engravers and bad engravers. In the later Kushans, there are more mediocre engravers and less exceptional ones. And I think that actually there's a very straightforward explanation. They have to make more dies. And when you have to make more dies, you have to compromise a little in the hiring policy. So you've got more people who are just okay at the job. Right? Whereas under Huvishka, you tend to only have 1 or 2 people. And so those people are either very good or they got the job for some other reason and they're very bad. So I think sometimes our picture of the engravers is a little bit distorted by the same collecting practice effects that distort our number of coins. So I entirely accept your point that there is potential error in terms of using the dies as an indicator of production, which is what we're doing. But it's a much better indicator than the number of coins, and there is no way that difference between the Gupta coins and the Kushan coins can be explained by the dies being less efficient. The Gupta coinage is huge by comparison with the Kushan coinage. That's an inescapable conclusion. Even if it's 5 times the size rather than 10 times the size, it's still yeah, it's much higher. Yeah. So, but no, your point is entirely valid. That there is a margin of error there.
My question is in support of what Dilip has said. If we are saying, if we are assuming that the number of coins are more in case of later Kushans as compared to the imperial Kushans, does that mean during the reign of the later Kushans, the Kushan Empire was much more broader than the imperial Kushans? That is why they needed more coins?
No. We know the empire is smaller. We know under the later Kushans that the empire is much smaller.
Then why did they need more coins?
That's an excellent question. We don't know, because we know very little about the politics of the empire. One thing to bear in mind is that the later Kushan kings face more military threats on their northern and southern border than the early Kushan kings. One of the questions you have to ask is, why is gold coinage being made? We know why Bhima Kadphises makes gold coinage. We know it's prestige. We know that it's something. You have to imagine a situation like this. Bhima Kadphises is a great king. He knows he's a great king. Great kings have gold coinage. So he orders gold coinage to be made. Right? So when the Bhima Kadphises, when the coinage starts, we know that's what it's about. The very strange pattern of production pretty much demonstrates that. So I've written a very lengthy article on this, and with a lot of detail explaining exactly why we know that. Under Kanishka and Huvishka and Vasudeva, they're regularly making gold coinage, but not very much. So what are they using it for? Now, it's really important to realise that in the 3rd, 4th century, whether you agree with the idea of feudalism or not, something fundamentally alters in the material record. There are virtually no copper plate charters, earlier than the Guptas. A few, but virtually not. Once the Kushans go, and the Guptas go, there are many copper plate charters. Something has changed in the material record. Is it that people used to write these things on perishable records, and now they write them on copper? Or is it that they didn't used to make them, and now they do? And the gold coinage seems to be part of that. In the 2nd century, you did not need a gold coinage. Most kingdoms got by just fine without it. It's clear that at the very beginning, the Kushans didn't need a gold coinage, but that's why you make a prestige issue rather than a regular issue. But they obviously found a use for it, a utility, once they were making one, because they keep making it, right? So is it that what you are doing with gold coins changes? That things that you previously did in some other way, you now do by spending gold coins? Military payments, administrative payments, Brahmins, right? The texts tell us Brahmins like to be paid in gold, right? The question that you should always have in the back of your mind is, hold on a second, these texts are supposedly written when there wasn't any gold. What are the Brahmins being paid in? So there are social and economic shifts that take place. The gold coinage is indicative that something like that is happening. It doesn't tell us what. Right? What it does is very much like the model. It raises a question. It asks us, and remember, the Kushan Empire is making more gold coins, but the Kushan Shahs are making gold coins. By this stage, the Guptas are making gold coins. Master, whoever he is making gold coins. It's not just that the Kushans are making gold coins. There are more people making gold coins. There's suddenly the Samatata coinage in Bengal comes in at this stage. Right? More gold coins. Right? You go from a stage where in 110 AD there was no reason to have a gold coinage except for prestige, to a situation around 340 AD where everybody who's genuinely at imperial level is making a gold coinage. It's important, and they're making enormous numbers. We're not going to answer that question by looking at the coins, right? But we can pose that question and say, something has changed, right? And we can ask that question to people who work in epigraphy, people who work in archaeology, people who work in texts. What has changed?
It was made for the trade, like the Britishers, the Romans, they were coming for the trade in the southern part of India. And the gold coins were actually in demand. They were for the trading purposes, the Roman gold was much in demand. That might be another reason for the northwestern part of India.
It might
Chinese,
be.
Maybe silk trade or silk road.
It could be, people have suggested that. One of the problems with that is we can often, you can posit ideas, and sometimes we can test them at points. One of the problems is that the Kushan period is very strange. The copper coinage moves around a lot, right? It travels. But actually, that Deborah Damo hoard is very unusual, right? Gold coinage tends to stay in one place. Right? Now, that might not mean that it actually did stay in one place. That just means it's only deposited, it's only recorded inside the Kushan Empire. Maybe if it went outside the empire, it got melted down. It went as gold, not as coin. We don't know. It's certainly some of it must have got to Bengal because the Samatata coinage copies it, right? But actually, very little of it's found there. Right? So again, we are in this position of often being able to ask questions. Right? The numismatics is a discipline that, when it's pursued in its own right, generally poses questions rather than answering. So we know a little bit more than we did 10 or 20 years ago. But what's always the case, when you know a little bit more, you will ask yourself more questions. And the question you ask is a very good one. Why does this much smaller empire need so much more gold than this very large empire did 100 years before?
I'm not a numismatist, but I think everybody can hear me. I'm loud. I'm not a numismatist, but I'm loud.
Yeah.
So, couple of problems that maybe you've addressed in pages 2 and 3,
Yeah.
since I don't really get them. But there seem to be some very casual presumptions. The first is that every single die makes X coins.
This
Number
is
one.
Philip's point, yeah.
Number 2, that all the dies are used one after the other at the same location, or the location of making coins remains unique at any given time. So, just supposing that numerous dies were made when it was important to mint coins on location at numerous locations, and that the die had nothing to do, just for example's sake, that the die had nothing to do with the number of coins, but had something to do with the ability to make coins on demand, would, I'm sorry to say, completely wreck what I understand is your hypothesis.
It would certainly damage it. It would certainly cause problems. Yeah.
So do you take into consideration this possibility?
Yes, I can. So some of that's a very valid point. I'll just let the camera train itself back over here. So that's a very valid point, and there are a lot of assumptions going into this. The assumption is not that each die makes the same amount, but that when you are dealing with numbers that are actually of the order of hundreds of dies, that on average they make very similar amounts, and therefore the difference is, we know, absolutely know, that different dies made different numbers of coins. In some places I can prove it. I can demonstrate that this die made a lot more coins. And that I can give a very lengthy talk about one particular die and its and how that die seems to be associated with some sort of crisis. And the mint seems to have the authority to make reverse dies, but not the authority to make new obverse dies. And so it just keeps hitting this die. And somebody will occasionally come along and try and touch it up, but it just keeps hammering this die away, and this die gets worse and worse and worse, right? Until the crisis is ended and some central authority gives them permission to make a new die. So we know, in that case, that die must have made many more coins than is normal. So we know that that's an issue. But as I say, we are really, when we make the model, interested in the average over a very large number of dies. And as I said, even if we were out by a factor of 2, it wouldn't alter the general pattern. You know, these are differences of orders of magnitude rather than just 50% or 60%. We're not looking at fine detail. Your other point is very much about how much we know about the activity of the mint. And the answer is that varies a lot. So under Shaka, people aren't very interested in those coins. They tend not to get well reported. On average, you know, for any particular die, I've seen a couple of coins made by that die. Under Huvishka, that's not true. For one, it's not unusual for me to see 20 or 30 coins made by the same die under Huvishka. I can see that the mint made coins with this obverse and this reverse, and then the reverse broke, and they changed the reverse, then they changed the reverse again, then they replaced the obverse and started the new reverse, and they used 2 different reverses. In some places I can demonstrate categorically that the different gods on the back are a batch control mechanism. The mint changes the god at a certain designated point. I don't know what it is they're controlling. Maybe it's a new batch of gold, maybe it's a new date, but they change the god at a certain point. So I can see a lot of detail. And I know that the main mint in Balkh, in Afghanistan, its standard practice is to have 2 obverse dies fixed at 2 workstations. And it has a set of reverse dies, and they seem to be something to do with batch control, and there's probably a little box of them. And in the morning when the workmen come in, there's 2 sets of workmen, they grab a die out of the box, they take it to the workstation, and they start hammering. And so the next morning when they come in, they might grab the other die, so the dies switch backwards and forwards between the workstations. And I can see that's happening at the main mint of Balkh, and I can see the subsidiary mint most of the time has only 1 workstation, right? So there's obviously a difference in the expectation. The main mint is expected to make more coins, so it's set up in advance to do so. And so I can see and understand the production procedure. And that means that I have a very strong sense of why dies are being taken out of production. And it seems to relate both to a procedural and to a wear factor. And it doesn't seem to be something that would throw off our calculations very badly. The mint is following a fairly sensible procedure. They're using dies, they essentially allocate a period that the die is likely to be worn out. The danger, of course, would be if the mint had made 20 obverse dies and it had just put them in a box and it pulled them out and it hammered, and it just randomly pulled one out, and then we'd see 20 obverse dies, but actually all of them were in pristine condition. And there are periods when that's true of the reverse dies. So we can see that the obverse die gets a fairly routine amount of wear. If you've got multiple examples of an obverse die, you can look at the coins and you can see small fine cracks appearing in the die in good quality examples. Unfortunately, gold keeps detail wonderfully, so we can see what's going on. So you can track that, and we can see at some points that this happens with the reverses. That a reverse die is absolutely fresh on the only occasion we see it. And the other reverse die is absolutely fresh on the only occasion we see it. It doesn't seem to happen with the obverses. So we can be reasonably confident within, as I said, a quite a large margin of error. So these are very valid concerns, and they are concerns that we've looked at, and analysis has been done, and it's quite lengthy. They remain concerns, even for me. I remain concerned about the same thing. Was there a procedural shift? Could that explain what we see as a peak in production? Might it actually be a procedural change? And there is at least one point where I am not confident. So under Kanishka II, the production appears to rise and then drops back down again. And that's based on our best estimate for how long his reign is and our best estimate for what's happening in terms of production. We might be wrong about how long his reign is, right? And so if his reign is 10 years longer, which is possible, then the production would fall back down to the same level as everybody else. And actually, doing this made me look again at that. And so it's, as I said, the model
is a cross-checking.
Is a cross-checking thing. And I looked again, and so that there is a little peak on the chart, which actually makes me suspicious that maybe we have not dated Kanishka II correctly. It would make me, especially because he's initially running only a single mint. What was the subsidiary mint has to become the main mint. It has to up its production rate because the main mint has been captured by the Kushana Sassanians. So his subsidiary mint now needs to become the main mint, and then he doesn't open a subsidiary mint until partway through his reign. So I wouldn't expect his reign to be a very high level of production, but it seems to be a slight peak. But it's a slight peak. It's about 60–70% higher than the peaks around. So it's enough for me to think, that's explainable in other ways. But a jump of 10 times isn't explainable in that kind of production.
Just one more.
Yeah.
Query. So you did mention very briefly something that you were saying, that there is a differential rate of collection error.
Yes.
How do you account for that? I mean,
I think it's really straightforward in the museum collections. And remember that Arnaud Sharma didn't just look at museums, he prioritised those museums whose collections had been primarily acquired in the 19th century. The British Museum, Calcutta, the Bibliothèque Nationale, right? So, of course, right, that he got what 19th century British collectors were interested in. And what they were interested in was Alexander and anything associated with Alexander. So Kushan coins have Greek legends, right? They wanted every Kushan coin, especially Kanishka and Vishka, because they're mentioned by Xuanzang, the Chinese pilgrim. The Chinese pilgrim and Alexander's accounts of what Alexander Cunningham is so enthralled by. Right? He's not interested in Guptas. Right? So the collections that, if you look at hoard data, which John Dale has actually done, the hoard data brings the Gupta coins much more back in line with the Kushans. Right? And the die studies suggest that even that is probably not giving you a true picture, that the Kushans are probably still over-reported, even in the hoard data. Because again, John Dale is still including 19th century hoards. They're over-reported for Kushans.
Last question, not related with this. How do you account for misspellings in dice? I mean, shouldn't there have been somebody to check the damn thing? I mean, this is an imperial mint, right? This is not me trying to make them in my kitchen. I've always had this problem with numismatic studies.
Yes, the question boils down to a very simple one. How do I account for incompetence? How do we... So different mints have different, what I might call profiles of competence. If you look at the Roman mint, which is a good comparator because people have done these kinds of studies with the Roman mint, it's why, and they're contemporary. And we know that Kushan coins look a bit like Roman coins. And actually, one of the things that has not been widely accepted in Roman studies is that the movement of ideas is two-way there. Right? Some Roman coins look a bit like Kushan coins because they're copied from Kushan coins. So if you look at Roman mints, it has a very different profile of competence. Roman coins are uniformly good, right? Not brilliant. They're very rarely brilliant. And we can see patterns in there that kind of explain it. There's a very good control of the artistic workshops. So there's a chief engraver, there's sub-engravers. It's presumably very like the description we get of the Mughal mint. And the description of the Mughal mint, if you think about Mughal coins, they are consistently good. They are rarely exceptional, but they are never incompetent. The Kushan mint has a very different profile. It is occasionally brilliant. Right? As I said, there is at least one artist on the Shaka who is exceptionally good. Towards the end of the reign of Vasudeva, in about 220 AD, at the subsidiary mint located at Taxila, there is a single artist who is brilliant. He is, and if you are ever shown a Vasudeva coin, it appears in a picture in a catalogue or something, guarantee it's that artist's handiwork that appears. Right? He's just exceptional. But the artist before him is not very good. The artist after him is not very good. And the artists at the main mint are actually a bit rubbish. Right? And under Vishka, at some points, the artists are truly terrible. But occasionally they're brilliant. Right? And it's a very different profile of competence. And I don't know why it is, but it's clearly to do with procedural activities at the mint. And it means that the engravers sometimes know their trade and sometimes aren't very good. And I suspect to some extent that the engravers are seal engravers. My assumption has always been that most coin engravers are primarily seal engravers who are brought into mints and learn the trade of a mint. And to be honest, engraving a seal is like engraving a coin, but it's not that like engraving a coin. And some artists will take to it well, and some artists will take to it well. But all you have to do is go and open one of the publications of seals, put it in front of you, and compare it to a representative sample of coins. The really bad coin engravers are a lot better than the really bad seal engravers. The really bad seal engravers are truly terrible, right? Once you put them side by side, you can see, oh, it is the cream of the crop that's been selected. But sometimes the cream of the crop is not very good. And sometimes it's explicable. Sometimes the production goes up and the quality goes down. And that's very explicable. You've just got, if you need more coins, you've got to engrave more dies, you need more engravers, you just have to accept people who aren't as good at practice. Sometimes, however, you're right, it's just not that explicable. And things like spelling the legend wrong, it's just, why would you do that? Why would somebody not check that?
Even at that time, there are people dyslexic.
Yeah, presumably. But some mints do it and some mints don't.
Kindly adjust.
But you're right, but there are very different profiles of competence of different mints, and they reflect different levels of care and attention. I think paid actually not at the level of the engravers, but at the level of a sort of manager. In a sense, you're asking yourself, is the manager of the mint good? Is there a culture in that mint of working hard and paying attention to their work? And the smaller a mint is, I suspect the more variable its output is going to be. Right? When a mint is small, I suspect that procedure will depend on fewer people. And so if those people are good, things will be good. If those people are bad, things will be bad. When a mint gets very large, procedures depend much more on a tradition that is passed down amongst a large group of people. The Mughal mint, if you read about it, has a lot of people involved. Right? There are a lot of coins made. It's very clear the Kushan mint is nowhere near that many. Right? It's almost certainly not in constant production. Right? occasional production is the model that's being followed. You know, you do not need to be hammering coins every day to get through 4 dies in a year, right? Especially when you're doing it in 3 workstations. Right? You're just not going to get through that number of. You hammer them every day. You go through them in a month. People have done experiments where they hit dies over and over again to see how long they last. It does not take long to break them. So with that number of dies, the mint is maybe opening for a week and making coins, and then it's probably shut for a few months and open for a week again. And we don't know. The project that I'm presently involved with is called Beyond Boundaries, and it's an attempt to bring together people from different disciplines to work on the 4th to 7th century in India and Southeast Asia. And as a numismatist, there's no way for me to know why coins are being made. But one of the people working on the team, Ulrich Hagel, works on Buddhist texts about taxation and laws. And see, one of the things he can bring to that is he can tell me, well, things like, who asks for coins? Do we have free minting? Can you take your gold to the mint and ask for it to be turned into coin? Or is the mint only open for the state? Does the state take gold, have coin, and distribute the coin? We don't know at that level how this operation works. Of course, we know for the Mughals how taxes worked, how the mint operated. We know how Sikha operated. We know that the Treasury cheated you, that it insisted on giving coins out at Sikha, but it would take coins back at discount. So we know from reports how we don't know in the ancient world how that operated. This is what the model kind of does. It says to us, okay, what are our assumptions? And you're right, there are lots of assumptions in there. Building the model makes those assumptions explicit. It makes it explicit that I am working on an average number of coins per die, that I'm assuming certain things about the procedure of the mint, that I'm making certain assumptions that our hordes are representative, therefore can tell us the loss rate of loss they're telling us is standard. I'm assuming that the coins that are lost from circulation are a certain proportion of the coins. That needn't be true. The state's ability to recapture coins might actually be a fixed amount. The state might just have a certain fixed amount of revenue, which is its ability to capture coins and bring them back to the mint. So I've made an assumption. Right? It's a reasonable assumption, but I don't know. But what it does is by building a model, you make those assumptions explicit, and you make it explicit what you need to go and look for. So I presented 3 questions at the beginning, and they were the questions I needed to start the model. And now that I have done that, I have more questions resulting in the model, and I can pose those questions, and I can say to myself, well, what evidence could I go and approach to try and resolve those questions? So it's this kind of procedure, a sort of cyclical procedure, going through the questions, producing the results, thinking about, well, what assumptions have I made? Are they valid? How could we test them? Some of them we can't test. Some of them we just don't have. And so we have to go on what we think is most reasonable. Or we measure it both ways, and we say, do we get similar? So we can do the thing of assuming that the Gupta's dies made fewer coins, and we can measure the data again that way. And it doesn't really make any difference. The Gupta coinage is still huge. So we can go, okay, the basic conclusion, that's inescapable. Even if we cannot discern, and we have to be very cautious with those Gupta numbers, because whereas I have very detailed die studies for Kushans, Ellen Ravan has been working for a number of years on the Guptas, it's very clear that we do not have a good sample of Gupta dies, even though she's got maybe 3 times as many Gupta gold coins as I have Kushan coins in her corpus. Right? She's still typically, it's very rare for her to see a coin made from multiple, where she sees the same die a couple of times. Whereas, to be honest, if you show me a Havishka coin today, right, I would wager money that your coin has an obverse die I've seen before, right? And if I did wager money, right, I'd be likely to win that the coin has a reverse die I've seen before, right? So if you show me a Havishka coin, and if you show me a Bima Kadvaisis coin, a double dinar, the double dinar spec, you will not show me a new die. We have seen every die in the mint rate. We are 100% certain there are no other dies to see, right? So we've seen every die in the mint rate. So sometimes our sample is very good, but Guptas it isn't. So we need to be very cautious about those Gupta numbers. They are generally indicative, right? But I've physically seen more Chandragupta dies than I know Havishka's mint ever had for the obverse by a factor of 2. So it's huge.
And that's corroborated by the number of coins we have found of the archer type of Chandragupta more. There is always more.
Yeah, if you look at the treasure trove finds in the 60s and 70s, rather than looking at the 19th century, actually Chandragupta coins are significantly more common than Havishka. And that's probably a much more representative set of hoards than the problem with Dale is it included 19th century hoards as well, which were almost certainly overrepresented. Okay.
Just a minute, I think we can have some of the questions a little later with Robert, because the conversation can go on very long. And this tells me why I'm so happy doing Mughal coins, where there's a regular to tell me that this is not the same die. So I would like to invite Girish Veena sir to just say a few words as a word of thanks to Robert for the time he has taken out.
Hello. Thank you very much. It's a much elaborated lecture, and I'm sure that everybody gained some knowledge from your lecture. This is our first lecture in this series, so more to become. We wish to see you all in our future lectures also. Thank you very much. One second, I must thank my friend Dr. Dilip Rajgor for his help as always, and Mr. Mahesh Kalra also. Without his help, I don't think this could be happening. Thank you very much, Mahesh also.